Hi everyone, my name is Nadia Smith. I'm a pastor at In the Garden Ministries. Today we are having an interview with Johannes Smith. He has been through a discipleship process of about a year and a half, and he specifically has been discipled in biblical principles. And so today we're going to ask him a few questions, and he's going to tell us about how these biblical principles has influenced his life for the better, and how he's implemented them and how it's helped him develop into the young man that he is today. Now, Johannes, let's start with you telling us why you needed help in the first place.
Well, what I can remember is that in the beginning I couldn't focus. I couldn't sit still. For instance, in an interview like this, I wouldn't be able to sit still for more than 5 minutes. I couldn't keep my hands to not fidget or whatever. The process began by teaching me the principles so that I could learn how to grow up and become a young man instead of just remaining a boy, but physically growing. So the growing into a young man part was so that I could be a functional and successful man that knew how to act and how to conduct myself in different situations.
Before we carry on, I just want to make sure your upbringing as a child, did you have a stable household, happy family, happy parents?
Well, yes, I suppose I could be lucky in a sense that I'd never had divorced parents or someone died in my family. I mean, I had 2 sisters, so I never had a brother, but, that's okay because it wasn't a big problem. But, we loved each other. We always did stuff together. We went on holidays together. Everything was fine. It was just the problem, I think, was just that I never, learned how to develop as a man.
Right, so will you please tell us a bit about your process?
So excuse the papers. But, so, as you know, as a child, I couldn't sit still and focus for longer than 5 minutes in general. So what that means is I was always either busy fidgeting with my hands or looking around or not really looking like I was focused, even though I could hear things, but I wasn't giving the impression to the other person that I was actually paying attention or thinking what they were saying was valuable. I couldn't think. We have a process where you think from point A to B and you have a straight thought pattern. Mine was not that. Mine was the opposite, the spaghetti brains. My thoughts went everywhere except to point B. Sometimes I even ended up at point A again. I always spoke a lot, but I never got to the point. So people got tired of me speaking. So they would never really pay attention to me anymore. And then I would speak more to think that they didn't hear enough. And then that just ended up a mess always. The principle of planning ahead or beginning and end helped me with my talking and my speech. So how it helped me was, when you plan, I was taught that if you plan what you're going to say before you start saying it, then it's much easier to go from point A to B when you're speaking. Because then you don't have to, in the middle of talking, think about what you want to say next. You can just say it. Because if you have to think about it, then there's a gap where you think about it, but you're also speaking still. So then what you're saying isn't necessarily what you wanted to say, and then it's kind of a blabber in the middle of what you wanted to say. And the beginning and end, obviously, when you have a speech, you have to begin and you have to end, because if you don't have a solid ending or a solid beginning, then people will lose interest in what you want to say. So to me, the principle of forward planning or planning ahead, though quite a basic principle in general, was one that changed the way I do everything, because that meant that I have to now think about every aspect of something before I even start doing it. So I can't just start doing my homework. I have to think, what am I going to do with my homework? How much time do I need for this homework or that? And then even basic things like, if I want to get dressed now, how much time would I need? Anything that you do could actually be planned ahead, even though it doesn't look like it. The planning ahead also links into living intentionally or sanctified action and speech, because then you have to think about it before you do it, and that causes that it's not just a babble, it has a purpose. It has a purpose. another aspect of my life was how I interacted with others. So my relationship with everyone around me also changed because I was a very selfish person when I was small. I still is sometimes. So the way I spoke to teachers and older people, friends, even the members of the fellowship, everything had to change. Because when I spoke to teachers, there was always an aspect of, it's a teacher, but you don't really want to take them seriously because they give you work and you don't like them. But when I had to implement the principles, it was that they had the authority and they're taking their time to teach me things that are actually going to help me in the future. And that changed my mindset, so I had much more respect for teachers without them doing anything. It was just on my side the change. Older people in general, like my parents, for instance, I had to change the way I spoke to them. My parents' friends or my uncle or aunt or whatever, I had to change my approach. I always greeted, and the way I spoke, I didn't say, stupid things that often anymore. I spoke less. And with friends, this was a big change because usually, I don't know, but with friends you have a alter ego where you have like a set up image for your friends because you want to be cool or whatever. And even though I didn't have a lot of that, I still had a figure that I was before my friends, and I didn't like that anymore. And with the principles, it was easier to identify that and then to actively start changing that. When I spoke to my friends, I had to be aware, and when I did something, I always made kind of a mental note, I don't want to do that anymore, be aware in the future. The members of the fellowship, that was quite an easy one because I got rebuked a lot. But when I spoke to people in the fellowship, I had to reduce the amount of words I said. The times I said me, I had to be almost zero in each sentence. So the talking about self aspect, that had to fall away completely, and that helped a lot. And also, when you're speaking in terms of fellowship, you have to have a body mindset. You have to think about the others and not about yourself, which was difficult for me in the beginning, but the principles is like a guideline to help you. So I had to learn how to conduct myself properly in that aspect to everyone that I was in a relationship with. So, yeah. Then with my schoolwork, that was a very practical change that had to happen because my approach usually in the beginning, before I had the principles, was, it's work, and if you don't really feel like doing it, then it's okay because I still get the grades or what. But now that I actually could use the principles, I could project to an end goal, which then helped me to plan ahead towards that, and so I could make decisions according to the goal that I set in the end. So when I have the goal, for instance, if I wanted to go do architecture, then I have that as a goal. Then I don't see the schoolwork anymore as, it's a lot of work, I don't really feel like doing it. Because if I don't do it now, then I won't get the marks, and then I might not get into architecture. So then you have to think about that every time when you're making decisions. Then that's also like a guideline for making your decisions, and then you can plan accordingly. So then you can plan, okay, I need to do that amount of work or that amount of effort I need to put into this to get that goal or to achieve the goal. I noticed quite a big difference when I actually started to study and implement the principles with you have to have a beginning and an end. So when I was studying, I didn't go I'm going to study for an hour, and then 15 minutes in, I would be like, oh, I want some water or something, and then I'd have to go around. I had to implement, you have to begin, and then if you said you're going to end at that time, then I had to force myself to continue until the end. And after doing that, even though it wasn't that nice, but when the results came, I was actually not, I was surprised. I mean, I didn't think it would work. I actually hoped it didn't work so that I could just say, oh, but see, it doesn't work, so I don't have to do the work. But it did, so that proved me wrong. So my marks increased drastically. And at school, when I started paying attention in class, during actual class time and doing my homework and that kind of aspect, I even asked questions to the teachers, and I improved the relationship with the teachers so that I didn't feel scared or whatever when I was asking them or something. So in that aspect, I already at school during the year, before the test or before studying, I already had all the information I needed on the work. So then the studying wasn't as difficult. So I didn't have to go 6 hours in one day. I had to study and then only go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, because that wasn't needed, because I already knew what I had to do and the stuff that I was struggling with. So I didn't do the easy stuff just because it was easy. I went to the hard stuff and actually tried to figure out what it was, asked for help, that kind of thing. And then in the test, then most of the time, some of the hard things that I struggled with, they don't ask a lot of that, but then it's also helpful because then that gives you that extra bonus on the marks. This helped me because I didn't have to study that long, even though I didn't like it. So it was also it was like a relief to me because I knew, okay, so if I study 2 hours, then it would be enough because I did all the work during the year instead of having to know, I have to study 6 hours in one day now, because I personally wouldn't be able to do that. There's another big aspect of my life, like most teenagers, I think, is where I didn't necessarily like rules or regulations, and I didn't know why it had to be implemented, and I didn't like that my family had like certain rules and ways you had to do things or agreements in place. I never understood the value of having rules, that it was actually to keep people safe from, because then you have other problems that go with that if you don't implement the rules. It's not just you that gets influenced. But then also the thing was, I never liked consequences when you don't abide by the rules. Even though I didn't want to abide by the rules, I never thought that consequences were actually going to be implemented, because I could always manipulate my parents or the people or the teachers or whatever to kind of slip past the consequences to make it sound better, like put a bit of glitter on it. After a process, or a 1.5 year process, I started actually realizing the benefits of abiding by the rules and the agreements. So in that sense, I mean, with my parents or my family, for example, if there were rules regarding like bedtime, or I'm allowed to do certain things not in week time or on weekends or that kind of thing, if I didn't implement those things like I used to, then there would always be consequences, and we would also be in arguments, and I tried to say no, but it wasn't that bad, whatever. But it was always this kind of like a contention between us in the family, because if you don't abide by the rules, it wasn't just between me and them, it was also like my sisters and my everyone in the family kept, like, it wasn't a nice feeling when you had to have consequences for someone in the family. So when I started implementing what I was, like the rules and abiding by them, it actually started improving my relationship with my family. So we could have, instead of having disputes or whatever about who was wrong, we could rather just enjoy the time together, safely do it when it was the time to do things, enjoy family time. But also when we had the work aspect, it wasn't as bad anymore, because I knew that if I didn't do it, then it would also have a negative impact. So by just abiding by the rules, the whole situation was kind of made better, in a sense that I enjoyed it more when I was abiding by the rules. Like at school as well, when you don't get into trouble, it's just a better feeling, because you don't have that guilty feeling in your stomach. You can kind of just go on doing what you do, knowing that you're going to be safe in whatever you do, because you're going to just do it by the rules. So then no one can confront you on that you're doing this wrong or that wrong, and then you'd have to defend yourself, and that the whole situation is just not a nice thing to be in general. So to sum up what I'm saying about the agreements, so the principles actually helped me. When I implemented the principles, it became more a natural thing to abide by rules or agreements, or have a better relationship with my family in that sense, because then it wasn't something that I had to actively think about. Then the principles became almost like a habit, that you do the right things and you do things in a certain way, and then it will end up to have a good outcome for you. So in that sense, that I didn't have to focus so much on the rules anymore. I could just, by doing the principles, I automatically abided by the rules, and then we could automatically have a much safer environment with family sense, and we had a mature relationship. I could speak without being like, I'm the little kid here. Like, we had mature discussions, and we can start having better family time without all the conflict in wasted time on conflict. Not with the practical aspect anymore, but also spiritually, the principles are very valuable. seeing that it is a very practical thing most of the time, but spiritually, it can also, in my case, it forced me to be accountable. So why I say that's a spiritual thing is, usually I felt I could get away with things because I was lying to myself and lying to everyone around me, even though I convinced myself, I lied to myself by saying I wasn't lying. So that's like a kind of a paradox thing. But so I was doing that, and then with all the principles, if I just looked at the paper, I didn't really want to look at the paper anymore, because what I was taught, that there's no more escape route, you can't lie to yourself, like all my excuses for doing the wrong things was taken away. So spiritually, the principle of formulating, when I had to look at myself, that was being honest with yourself about the things you do and don't do. Not saying what you're doing right or wrong, like you said in the accountability teaching now, but you actually just look at the things that you did honestly, and you just evaluate everything, and then you can use the principles and formulate on it, and then you can have a clear cut, like, okay, so what does need to change, what habits are good, what habits are bad or not so good. Then you have to be like 100% honest with yourself. And there I learned the value of being honest with yourself, because if you try and hide something but you really actually want it to change, but you're kind of embarrassed or whatever, then it won't change. Like, you have to, it doesn't help other people tell you, okay, this thing is bad. You have to actually tell yourself, because that's the one person you always want to lie to, even if you tell someone else the truth. So overall, the principles improved my relationship with everyone around me, not just my family, not just my, the people in the fellowship, not my friends, like everyone. Like, if I walk across the street and someone walks by, I'm a blessing, or I greet, or whatever, like everyone around me, the relationship improved. And it also improved my relationship with God, because I could implement the principle of beginning and end when I was reading the Word and formulating, and all of these things have also a spiritual side to them. But I think the physical aspects are also very important. So.
Well, thank you, Johannes, for sharing your testimony. I'm sure many young people will be able to benefit from what you've said. From my side, I'd just like to give some background. So if it wasn't obvious in the beginning, I'm his sister. So we obviously grew up in the same house. And I'd just like to take a moment and maybe give some context to why, from everyone else's perspective, it was necessary for Johannes to change his ways. By the time that Johannes started this process with Pastor Bailey to implement the principles, he was unable to sit still. And I know he mentioned that, but I think just to really emphasize, he could not sit still. So he would fall over couches, roll around on the floor, not be able to sit quietly on a chair. He would be sitting on 3 chairs at once. He was talking incessantly all the time. But something for me personally that I've really seen, or an aspect that I've really seen Johannes grow in, is that he had an inability to feel any remorse or have any idea about what effects he was having or his behavior was having on anyone else around him. So even in the beginning, when he started implementing the principles, I could notice that he wasn't convinced that it was necessary to implement the principles or to even try. Obviously, from his perspective, his life was going the way he wanted it because he could do what he wanted to do and kind of get away with it. And so really only about 6 months after starting to actively implement the principles and many people reminding him to implement the principles, I think once he could really start seeing the benefits, only then did his motivations change, and he actually wanted to start walking it out and implementing it permanently. So just from where he started and where he is now, I could really see that the motivations for him wanting to do certain things in a certain way has changed. It's not just about what he wants anymore, it's about what will be best for everyone around him. And then obviously there is the sense of benefit for him, but I think a lot of his selfishness without him having to focus on getting rid of selfishness, just by implementing the principles, his selfish motivations have changed. So, and that's true for, I think, a lot of aspects in his life. Just by implementing the principles, he didn't have to focus on what he was doing wrong or what wasn't right in his life. Just by implementing the good side, balancing it to the positive, the negatives started, giving way naturally. So I think that's maybe just what I can add to that, and hopefully as a slight motivator to try to implement these principles at home. So thank you for sharing, and I hope everyone watching this will benefit.